Thank you all for coming and welcome to our presentation today about making team projects work and really focusing on, in all caps, of course, with an exclamation point, team projects work online. I'm Tim Franz. I'm a professor at St. John Fisher, and this is my colleague, co-author, and friend, Lauren Vicker. We have been working with groups and consulting and in our classes and co-teaching about group dynamics for many years together. This presentation today is based on our book, which we recently released, Making Team Projects Work. It's available on Amazon. Right now it's discounted, the ebook down to $2.99, and the print book is only $9.99. Now, the way the book is organized is most of it is about team projects in general. 13 chapters, 12 of them are about team project work. And today we're going to focus on primarily Chapter 11, which is team projects online. However, we are going to talk about some of the other information, give the foundations before we go into details about online team projects.
So let's look at,
Go ahead.
So let's look at the agenda for today. Before everybody zooms out, because we know it doesn't take too long for you to get distracted and start doing other things, we're going to start with a little exercise. A little sharing exercise and then a debrief exercise. Then, as Tim mentioned, we want to talk a little bit about the background and context for the discussion, because there are so many elements of groups that also apply to virtual groups and groups that you're working with online. We're going to talk about some of those issues, and then we're going to counter that with some best practices and give you some ideas for things that you can do and some resources that you can use. And then finally, we'll do a final exercise and get some key takeaways. And we have left some time for you to ask questions. And as Tim mentioned, we'll also ask you to fill out an evaluation form. So we're going to start out by asking you to think about online group work in business in general and in your courses with your students. So we're going to give you 2 minutes to think about what is one struggle that you have had with doing group work in business classes online. What have you struggled with? And then what's one area of success where you can see that students understand the importance of online group work? We always say how employers are always looking for people with teamwork skills. That's one of the top requirements for new hires. So we want to know, what have you been able to do where you can see that students understand the importance not just of teamwork, but also having to do it virtually. So we're just going to give you a couple seconds to jot down a few ideas, a couple of minutes, sorry. Okay, we're going to ask you to unmute your microphones for this next part. Tim?
Now we're going to put you into groups and we're going to organize you into breakout rooms. We're going to organize you into 3 different breakout rooms randomly. And in your breakout rooms, what we'd like you to do is make a brief list, 3 to 5 things on your list about the most important experiences your group has described, and make sure you choose one person to present for your group. So I am going to put you into breakout rooms right now, and I'm opening all the rooms. Okay, it sounds like everybody's back, and hopefully your groups did actually pick somebody to speak for the group. So room 1, let's hear from your group first. Give us a few things that you talked about in your group.
Okay, I'm the spokesperson. I know a few of you in here, but I'm Michelle Hammond at Oakland University, and Mike and Joy and I have done virtual teamwork in the past, so thanks for inviting me today. In terms of challenges, I think a lot of us just talked about the kind of key problem with teamwork in the classes is just students' motivation and engagement, and how that differs across different students can create some conflicts in the team. There are other aspects of problems that became, or aspects of group work that became more difficult, such as the different activities that we used to do that were done previously in hard copies or in the classroom that can't be replicated online, or visits to different locations. And we talked about problems with student scheduling and timing and how that's really changed during the pandemic. Some students are working a lot more and really stretched, and others have lost jobs and the like, and are under different sorts of pressures. So do you want just the conflict or do you want the success stories as well?
Oh, both, please.
Both. Okay. In terms of the success stories, as one is, so for me personally, I think the students are definitely understanding the importance of virtual teams. Like it's hard to argue against that right now. That we've had more success when we've been able to use flexibility in our approaches, and even sort of breaking teams or allowing different parts to be done with students alone. Being more specific with our guidelines, so things like a team contract or intermediary deadlines have been helpful. And then one of our team members had scheduled a guest speaker when they deliver their final presentations to increase the motivation to do a good job.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Tim, you're muted.
Muted, yep. Okay, let's hear from group 2 now.
Well, we didn't nominate somebody formally, but I'll go ahead and talk about what we talked about in our class. You know, we said one of the big problems right now for the students is distraction, because especially during the pandemic, they are working from home. And so you've got, you know, other family members at home, you've got siblings at home, you've got children at home, barking dogs at home, and all of that makes them less focused on the classwork. Some of the other problems that we talked about were communication, kind of the students get overwhelmed with the amount of communication and volume of communication coming at them. The fact that you can't really say, hey, just wait for the email, because they've got a lot of email in their inbox. And for challenges, also talked about technical issues. You know, trying for the students deciding what technical platform was best for them, but also when they're in Zoom, not having their video turned on. And so they're not as engaged because you literally can't see them. And that is a very different setting than in the classroom when you can't, you know, mute your image so that nobody can see what you're doing. You know, and I think that in terms of successes, we had actually not quite gotten around to that, but one thing I had written down personally was again the virtual teams. It is really hard to argue against the importance of virtual teams, especially at this point. And so students seem to get that right away. We also had discussed the fact that students seem to like the breakout rooms, you know, to break them into smaller groups, and that there was some success in getting maybe some additional interaction between the students in the breakout rooms, but just that it's then hard to integrate that back into the whole class, because of course, you know, I think we've all observed if you're in a larger class setting, face-to-face, students are less likely to talk. And if you're in a classroom where nobody can see anybody else, they're even less likely to talk. So, and I think that covered everything.
Can I just add something? I'm sorry to my group because I popped out by mistake earlier than I should have. I would just say like a positive in terms of the virtual groups, just finishing online presentations last week. Pleasantly surprised how well those can go online. So we had group presentations and, you know, students took them seriously. You know, the downside is maybe the energy level is a little different when presenting online versus in person, but they were still done well. So technology can make it work.
Very good.
Great, thank you. And let's hear from the third group.
Are they a shy group?
Somebody might still be muted.
Technological challenges like muting. Okay, right. No, the communication problems, the delays, the platforms that were mentioned, the motivation. Two things that came up, though, from several people were the challenges that students seem to have in finding times to meet virtually. It almost seems like worse than when we were having them meet in person, which is kind of weird because, you know, presumably they have 24 hours a day to choose from now. And then Keith mentioned this. I think I saw heads nodding. It's the same problem we have in teams in general with the divide and conquer approach, which almost seems to be worse in virtual situations. I just finished a class that was, strangely enough, on virtual teams, and for their final presentation, I had to do a training video, and the ones that decided everybody take a piece and we'll mash it all together, it was just painfully obvious that that's what they had done, versus the one team that had the bright idea that, hey, you have a pretty good speaking voice, why don't you do the voiceover for the entire thing? And it was so much better. And then the last thing, which I think has been mentioned here, is this weird thing where because students have been working in teams since day one of freshman year, and now they're virtual all the time, there's a lot of variability. Some realize how much they don't know because of all of this, and others think that they're complete experts in both because they've been doing it for so long.
Any areas of success from your group?
Yeah, I think one, just recognizing that variability with students. And then the other thing is we notice that students do start to come around and realize that they have a better opportunity to play to their strengths. So it's kind of the opposite of the divide and conquer approach. But it seems to be kind of a long winding road to get to that lesson. But it's a great lesson when they do.
Good. Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Well,
So-
thanks for all the feedback. And next, Lauren is going to talk about foundations of teamwork and what we think about how teamwork works. Now, we sent out chapter 1, and if you read chapter 1, you will have seen some of this.
My screen is not, somebody in the waiting. Don't know why my screen is not advancing.
And you click on the slide, there you go.
There we go. Okay, all right. So this is our simple IPO model that describes what happens in group processes. Tim and I have actually been teaching group dynamics together for almost 2 decades, and we've been using this model all along to show what the process looks like and all the elements that are involved. And it also became the basis for our book. So on the left-hand side, we've got the inputs. We've got, obviously the people. Who are those people? What kind of resources do they have? What do they bring to the group situation? Then we have the task, which is what you as the faculty member needs to devise and decide how you're going to put that together. Hopefully not just a task that individuals had to do that you just made to a group, but also making sure that it's appropriate for groups and all of the elements that are needed in the task. And then finally, we have the context. And so this includes the physical context, obviously, whether you're face-to-face or online, but it can also include some cultural issues and psychological things going on. And you mentioned quite a few of those when you talked about some of the challenges of teaching teams online. So those 3 inputs go into this big circle in the middle, which are the process variables. And these are things that are unique to every group, whether or not they're online. So all of these elements are really relevant with the norms and roles that develop, the leadership, how motivated the students are, how they make problems and how they solve problems, make decisions, how they deal with conflict, that sort of thing. And then as a result of this, what happens? Well, one is the task outcome, which is how well did they do on the project? And that's varying success, it sounds like, depending on how your students actually approached it. But one that's often overlooked is, what about the people? Are there person outcomes? And we're going to be talking about peer evaluation as one element of that. But it also begs the question, what is happening to people in terms of that experience of working on the group? Did they learn about teams and sharing on a team? Do they have an experience they can talk to in a job interview as a result of that? So this is our basic framework for how we approach teams. But what does that mean for you as an instructor? So Tim's going to talk about another model that explains it a little bit more.
So we took that input process output model and we rearranged it in our book to be basically an instructor guideline, a flow chart for how instructors should create and run and evaluate team projects in the classroom. And so this right here is basically 12 chapters of our book that we're covering in, about 5 minutes. So for more information, our book covers this in much more detail. So what we suggest is that a lot of people take a project, an individual project, and just assign it as a team. But instead of using an individual project that you've assigned to a team, it's really important to start with the design. And I heard this from one of the groups, is that the divide and conquer, or to me, the worst case scenario is the A student takes the project and does it and tells everybody what they're going to do, which I'm sure you've seen before. So that's not an effective design for a project. A team project really needs to be designed so that it's interdependent, so that it does use the different and diverse resources across the team, and so that it forces people to work together to continue the task, so that any project really starts with the design, coming up with a good design for that project. Once we come up with the design as teachers, we need to put people into groups. Now, in my past, working with Lauren in the past, and I know a lot of people do this, we let people self-select their groups. And we've pulled from the team-based learning literature here in the past about 8 to 10 years, and we no longer let people self-select into groups. And the reason is because the literature actually shows that this is not the most effective way. One, you get students who join together and are used to working together, students who share common interests. 2, we've seen friendships break apart. And 3, the problem when self-selecting groups is the old problem on the playground from when we were kids, where one person might get left out and then you have to figure out how to resolve that. So there's lots of reasons why self-selected groups don't work. It's better to find some systematic way to assign your groups, whether it's fully random or whether you're doing it with some skills-based questionnaire, or whether you're basing it on diversifying resources. All are great ways to do it, especially ways to diversify the resources and set up diverse groups in your class. But they need to be systematic and they need to be transparent. So students need to know how you assign people to groups and also why they were assigned to that group. Completely transparent. So once you've assigned people to groups, you need to give them the project. And giving the project shouldn't be just handing out a sheet of paper or putting it on your course management software. This takes some time. Give them time to get in their groups and get used to being in their groups, and set up times in their groups for a weekly meeting. Whether they use it or not is unimportant, but you have to make sure they have that block of time carved out in their schedule where they can meet each week. So then work to develop the team. These are all the things you do just to get the project going. Developing the team we'll talk more about later. Now, in the IPO model that Lauren talked about, in the middle was all that information about conflict and decision-making and problem solving. And in this, we've put that process box into one little thing, because as an instructor, that stuff happens. And you don't often know about what's going on in the team unless you check in with your team, unless you have the individuals check in with each other. So at this point, you should be doing multiple check-ins. And I also heard this as an area of success from one of the groups from the beginning, that multiple check-ins, checkpoints on the way, that the peers are evaluating each other, and you as an instructor are evaluating them both formally and informally. So really important to keep those check-ins going so you can see things ahead of time and act if you need to. And so the students can give each other feedback regularly in an ongoing way to develop and change and improve. Now they deliver the output, whether it's a paper or a project report or a presentation. And after that is the evaluation, which we all know is difficult. And just very quick, I'm going to give a couple of ideas for evaluation here so we can move next to the online team project work. 2 ideas. 1, you should be using peer response and instructor response. And second, evaluation should ongoing use developmental feedback to improve, and at the end have some summative feedback so that people get their grade. So peer eval and instructor feedback, that's both developmental and graded. And now Lauren is going to talk about issues with virtual group work, many of which we've heard already.
Yeah, so this might be repeating some of those things, but we just want to talk about some of the things that actually happen that we see on a pretty consistent basis. The first, obviously, miscommunication, misinterpretation, and there are all kinds of reasons for this. A lot of it is technology related. People have unstable connections. Every third word is broken up. People don't know how to mute themselves, and then or they don't know how to unmute themselves. And so we see all kinds of problems because we also are not close enough to these people to pick up on so many nonverbal cues. We can see a lot of facial cues, but in terms of body language and posture and gestures and that sort of thing. So that creates a lot of issues for us. It also seems that virtual group work, it's a lot harder to organize it. It seems that when students are together around a table in a classroom and getting an assignment, they're able to kind of pull things together a little bit more. We also see something called de-individualization, which means that people actually feel less committed to the group and less pressured to actually contribute to the group and be part of the group and take on an important role in the group. Obviously, as has been mentioned, we see enhanced social loafing. So people feel like because they don't feel so connected to the group, they spend more time not paying attention to things that are going on. So I'm sure that there are people in this room right now, in the Zoom room right now, who are texting, who are reading email, maybe you're doing some holiday shopping. And we see that with our students all the time. We can tell they kind of get that faraway look in their eyes when you call on them and that you realize that they weren't with you in the class. Also mentioned in some of your groups was people working separately rather than together. And students seem to be really enamored of using a Google Doc to put their presentation together. And so we've actually gone to students both physically and remotely and said, here's class time to work on your project. And they'll say, oh, we're just gonna use a Google Doc and have people add things. I see a couple of head nods there. So that seems to be promoted more when groups are working remotely. Obviously, many, many distractions. My home office actually faces the front of our house. And so I watch people walk by and I'm like, oh, that puppy's so cute. And Tim and I meet on a regular basis, and Tim has a cat named Calvin who loves to be on Zoom. And so, of course, every time Calvin comes and jumps on his lap or walks across the keyboard, we have to stop and talk about how Calvin is. And that all of these things are taking us away from the things that we need to do. And you guys also mentioned a number of different distractions that people will have. So as a result of these things, group work just slows down. It's a lot harder than when you're all gathered around a big table in the library study room and just working on a project. So it just slows everything down. There are also significant leadership challenges, which Tim's going to talk about later, because it's hard for a leader to emerge, or even if there is a designated leader, for them to be able to effectively lead. So we've talked a lot about all these problems, and now what we want to do is talk about what kinds of things you can do about them. Tim, you're muted.
There's those problems again. Those
we go.
technology problems. Somebody's mowing the lawn or blowing leaves outside my office, so I keep mowing, or I keep muting. So for this presentation, we came up with a top 8 list from our book for best practices for online teams. And I'm just going to go over these very quickly. We have 4 more slides that go over these in detail after this. So first, initiate your teams with face-to-face meetings if you can. Second, schedule regular face-to-face meetings if you can. I mean, right now it's a different world. So third, make sure to spend some time on team building so that they have time to get to know one another. Fourth, know your tools, your asynchronous tools and synchronous tools. We have so many online tools available to us now. Number 5, teach to the tools. We have to spend some time if we want to use some platforms, making sure our students know how to use those. And then number 6, match the tool to the task. Different tasks require different tools. Number 7, remain organized. And this is important for both you as the classroom instructor and for your students as the team members. And number 8 is appoint a leader who understands virtual work. And now Lauren's going to talk about the importance of face-to-face meetings.
And Tim has already talked a little bit about this, but one of the things we really wanted to emphasize was this idea of finding synchronous times where groups can get together. And whether or not you have to use Zoom or another platform when you can't meet face-to-face, students need scheduled initial and ongoing meetings. I have to tell you, I was teaching public speaking at Fisher in the spring when we went remote. And what was interesting was that the transition in many ways was almost seamless because we were already halfway through the semester and the students knew each other. We were doing TBL in the public speaking class, and the students had a chance to work in teams, and the teams were going to be staying together for their big presentations. And it seemed like they had already built an identity. You know, they had a team name and they had already given a lot of work, done a lot of work together. And it enabled them to build the culture. And it was interesting because when we started up then in the fall and we were totally remote, it wasn't the same. And so that's why it's important to have the students have time initially to meet and get together and figure out what they're about and understand, you know, what the requirements are and the things that they're going to need to do. But also make sure that they can build a team culture ongoing. So you don't want to just have a meeting the first day and then that's it. And so Tim's going to talk a little bit later about some ways that you can do that. He also mentioned establish a common meeting time. And I just want to underscore that because we had all the students the first day the teams met, take out your phone, find a time you're all available to meet. And it could be, you know, it could be Sunday night at 11 p.m., which apparently is a very popular time for our students to be meeting. But find a time where you've got that meeting time blocked out. You may need more of that as you get closer to the end of the project, but at least in the early stages, you've got that time that's devoted to getting together with the group. And setting up your norms and roles are also helpful because students might have to say, that time is sacred, that's my group time, and I am going to stick with this. So let's look at what happens as we try to look at the importance of team building.
So team building in virtual work is even more important than in face-to-face work because your students are remote and they don't have an identity as a team that they can use to do their team efforts. So the team building, even if it's minor things here and there, will help them to create a shared identity and really help your students to feel supported and part of your class and part of their team. Because we know that a lot of students feel left out in this virtual world. It's tough for them. So some ideas, and we've mixed some ideas in here that take a long time and some ideas that are very quick, easy ones. First, early on, a really good idea is to spend some time developing team norms and communication expectations. How they're going to communicate, when they're going to communicate, how long they're going to get back to people on their communication. That way they can hold their other team members accountable to those standards, to those obligations that they've set early on. Now, another very quick team building exercise is to have each team member tell a joke or a funny story, just very quickly, a couple of minutes. And if you're going to do this, set it up for your teams ahead of time. Make sure they know it's coming, because if you have team members like me, I have the worst jokes, and I have to think through my horrible dad jokes even when I do have them. So give them time to prepare and think about it. Now, another quick one is share something that team members don't know about you. This is something that you should only be doing once teams start to know each other. Because if they don't know each other, if it's new, they've just met, Of course, there's tons of things they don't know about each other. It's really fun. I find I've used this in consulting, and it's really fun with teams who have worked together for years to do this one. You can have them write it down on a piece of paper and put it in a hat. And then they send it to you. You pull things out of a hat and read it, and they email it to you, pull it out of a hat, and you read it, and they all have to guess who it is. One that takes a little longer and is a good introductory one is collect who am I slides. And you just create a template that says who am I at the top of the slide, and they fill it with, 5 or 10 pictures from their life, and they have to describe it. We've used this in a classroom situation as a really good way to allow students to get to know one another. Now, another one of the quick ones that we've used is share a show that you've recently binge watched. And in pandemic time, we know all of us have binge watched a show recently. So I don't know if any of you have used Kahoot, but Kahoot is a great way. It takes some time and it takes some setup, but it's a great way for teams to build culture. It's basically a quiz software program. It's free for to use for small groups, and so really fun. My students actually introduced us to this, and it is really fun for them to do. Now, as Lauren talked about, we often have bring your pet to team meeting day because Calvin joins us, but most of your students would love this too. Bring a pet, show them, make your dog do little hand movements or whatever it is. Students love that in their teams. They get to know one another. And then another quick one, what are you famous for? And it doesn't have to be, that you have a world record, but something small that you're really well known for. And so Lauren has used for me many years. I've stopped doing this, but that I rode my age on my birthday on my bike every year, and I've stopped doing it, but she used that for me for years. So these are activities that can help your team build that shared identity and help your students feel like they're part of something. Now, Lauren is going to talk next about the importance of tools in virtual teamwork.
And as we mentioned earlier, we've got asynchronous and synchronous tools. And I'm assuming that most of you have been teaching remotely. You have a pretty good idea of what those are, but we found that our students actually don't know. So part of the importance of virtual tools is you first understanding the tools and then being able to match the tool to the task, but also teach to the tools. Tim and I had 4 teams in doing projects in one of our group dynamics classes, and they were responsible for using 2 synchronous tools and 2 asynchronous tools. 3 out of the 4 teams said one of their synchronous tools was Google Docs. And we're like, how is that synchronous? Well, if 2 people are on at the same time, they're both adding things and you can see their comments. And we're like, no, you need to understand what tools and what tools work well in what particular situations. So there are a lot of tools where if I can add something to the Google Doc and maybe you're working on something else or you're not there, you're at your job. And so it might be several hours before you respond. So the students need to understand the different tools. You also need to understand that the students may not always be using the same tools that you're using. So you might have class over Zoom, but when they get together as a group, they may be FaceTiming or they may use Google Meet because it sits right there in their Google Drives. And I know a lot of people are very happy with Microsoft Teams as well. And even thinking about your course management system being an asynchronous tool for students to use when they get in there, and texting being synchronous. So the idea of doing the understanding of the synchronous and asynchronous and making sure that your students get it. I have to tell you that when we moved public speaking online, it was my first experience with presentations over Zoom. And I spent hours just working on how to share screens and how to make sure that people could hear the videos, and then setting up little tutorials for my students. And then we had practice sessions. I know Molly mentioned that her teams did a really good job on their presentations. I found that the teams that didn't practice didn't do nearly as well because you've got to know how it works. So just understanding those and just understanding what your students' experiences are so that you can make it easier for them. Tim's going to talk now about organization and leadership, which we mentioned were serious issues for remote groups.
Organization is one of the most important things, as I'm sure you've all learned, with virtual teamwork and virtual classwork. We've all seen this. When I first started teaching online a few years ago, I realized how important it was for me to have a plan. So it's important, this organization for the instructor. Know your plan and know when you're going to assign things, plan them out ahead of time, make sure that you have your rubrics ready and things that you can use so you can deliver all this stuff to the students so they know what they're doing. So in organization for the instructor is absolutely essential. But not only is organization for you as an instructor important, also keeping the students organized, having those multiple check-ins, having possible checkpoints throughout the semester where you can collect things, having different meetings that you drop in on where you can see how things are going. Lots of ways where you can keep the students on track. It's really easy, especially in the virtual world, for them to get lost out there. I know that sometimes things can be a week and I'll look back and say, wow, you know, a week's gone by in the virtual world and I haven't realized I didn't do something. So keep yourself organized, keep your students organized. Now, second important and last thing we're going to talk about with virtual teams is the importance of leadership. Now, as you all know, you're all in the Saunders School of Business, or almost all of you. You need to pick leaders for your teams or have them pick leaders who have experience, who have the confidence, and who have the willingness to be leaders. It's great to have somebody who's got the experience, but if they're not confident and unwilling, you don't want that person as a leader. Now, going beyond just general leadership, the person who leads your teams, each of your teams, needs not only experience in general, the skills-based experience, but also the experience in online skills, that they've done something as a team before virtually, so they know the different steps and how to do it. It will help your teams work more smoothly. And if you do need a quick assessment tool to find out about student leadership, there's one on our website that it's a PDF that you can download, you can modify, you can use it in your classes to help determine leadership. Now, Lauren and I, we've used this leadership assessment tool where we've collected it and helped them to select leaders. We've also given it to teams and let them use it as a self-assessment tool to help them select the leaders. It can be used in all different kinds of ways or modified as you see fit. So that's all we're going to talk about today for the importance of virtual teamwork and keeping people moving forward on these virtual teams. Because as you all said in your small groups, we all know now how important virtual teamwork is for all of us. And I assume we're not going back to the way things were, that this is going to be, we're going back part of the way, but we're going to be working virtually a lot more now. So we are going to end with one final exercise. And we, just like the one before, we'd like you to work individually first for 2 minutes. Think about 1 or 2 ideas from today's professional development seminar that you can use immediately for your own teaching or to help your students appreciate the role of virtual teams in a business setting. So 2 minutes. Next, we are going to, like before, put you into groups. And in your groups, we'd like you to discuss the ideas that you generated and then again, pick somebody to speak for your group. It should be a different person from you had before, and then share as a group one thing that you think you could use immediately with your students from this presentation. I'm opening up all the breakout rooms. You'll be back in the same ones.
Shall we go to each of the rooms and find out what you talked about today? Room 1 is Michelle, Mohammed, and Clark.
So I step up to share this time. For group number 1, we talk about how to appointing leaders in the teams. to facilitate the engagement. Is there also, do you want us to share only one thing?
Well, you can give us a couple.
Give
I
us a
think we have
couple.
time. We have time
Yeah.
for a few more. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then we also like the idea of using the evaluation not just at the end, but also in the middle of the team project to get more feedback from students. So those are probably the two that stand out the most. We actually have questions. I don't know whether.
Great word.
Well, should we take questions after we hear from the
Yeah.
rooms?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So one question is, what is the best way to appoint leaders and how to fold that leaders dynamic into the evaluations? Like, for example, would you reward the team leader or penalize them for the performance? And the second is there any good online 360 feedback tool that we can use?
So I will take the first question, which is, should you reward a leader? I would not, because that would create a competitive environment in your team where the leader would be getting something that the others wouldn't. So usually one student's going to step up. I find I've always found that one person steps up as the team. Lauren and I have never had any trouble. And sometimes that leader changes during the semester, but there's usually one person who can be the contact person, and maybe team facilitator is a better word for the teams you have, but just somebody who's the main contact and who's keeping them moving forward and on task and organized. So
one of the things we found in student groups is that it's really hard to actually appoint a leader. It's better to let the leader evolve from the group culture and discussion. And as Tim said, sometimes somebody will kind of step up and say, well, I'll organize the project or something like that. They always say, when we ask them to appoint a leader, they always say, well, we're going to share it. We're going to say, okay, well, how are you going to share it? You have to show us what the process is. And we did have we have had groups where we said, like, every week we used to meet with these groups, and every week we'd look and a different person would actually have the agenda. They prepared an agenda and they shared it with the group, and we could tell that they had done that. But more successful if there's one coordinating or facilitating person. But we generally don't appoint them in student groups. It just seems to not work as well as letting that evolve as part of the culture. In terms of the evaluation, we actually have some on our website, some examples of peer evaluation forms, and also I think we put up some forms that we actually use just to evaluate the project to give people ideas. Right. So, but we do take the peer evaluation definitely into account as part of the project grade for each team.
Yeah, and all these evaluation tools and many more are in the handbook. And so we have that leadership assessment tool that's on the website and also in the book. So you can find lots of resources. And we're on LinkedIn, putting posts out at least once a week where we're talking about these tips too. So feel free to
not to dominate, but just to follow up on that, we were kind of discussing how difficult it is to bring the feedback back to the students. So it's easy to like get the information, but just a lot of onus on us in order to feed that feedback back, if that makes sense. So if you have any tips on that, we're all ears.
Well, we've done that a few ways. First of all, you can use a quick informal feedback so first of all, let me back up. We now teach how to give peer feedback. We don't leave it to them because peer feedback can be useless or brutal in some situations. Some students know how to do it well, but some don't. And again, you get what is always depressing is we've seen this so many times where you have the student group where all those developmental check-ins that don't affect their grade, they're formative. They're designed to just get them thinking about what they're doing. And the students are giving 5 each, 5 out of 5, 5 out of 5. And then you get to the end of the semester and somebody's like 2 out of 5, 3 out of, and we say, why didn't you say something? I didn't want to. So the first thing is we do actually teach peer evaluation now. And I'm going to put a little plug in there. In I don't know what week, because we have a few posts still in between, but soon on LinkedIn, we will have a post, and we put them all on our website. We put them all on our Facebook page, but we will have a post soon on giving peer feedback, and it's in our book as well. So, so first, I would strongly encourage you to spend, a little class time teaching peer feedback so they know how to do it. But and now I lost where I was going, Michelle. So you're going to have to ask your question again.
Well, she was asking how we feedback to the student. And
Oh.
we've done that a few different ways. So
Right. And so I'm sorry, so in the informal formative stages, we let them do it. We don't have to pull it together. It's only until we're using it for grades that we have to pull it together. So the peer eval sheets we have, they have to share that discussion. Now, when things start to go wrong, sometimes we've started to collect those sheets and then do some evaluations and hand back the feedback anonymously. But in this formative stages, once you've taught peer feedback and they're really working to develop each other, they're usually pretty good at it. And that takes the onus off the instructor.
we also have done check-ins with groups where we actually sit in on a meeting and we spend some time with them. We see what they're talking about, what their agenda is. They can ask us questions about the project. But while we're doing that, we're kind of filling out a form to give them feedback and saying, seems like you guys aren't that well organized, or, good leadership has been shown. And then we actually just hand those back at the end of the session to say, you're on track with the project. And sometimes it's just really, we've done some things that are just anonymous kind of surveys. Like we said, have you picked the group that when we were doing modeling group behavior and evaluating outside groups, we said, have you picked your group yet? Have you secured the permissions? Have you? And then we'd be like, guys, there's 3 weeks left in the project. When are you going to do your observations? So we don't know who said that, but we said at this stage in the process, if you haven't already done these steps, that's part of the organization. We're concerned about your group. So we try to keep the communication open so that they feel like they can come to us when there are some issues.
Can I ask a follow up on that? It just occurred to me that, and I know that there are many of us in this particular group that teach group dynamics, teams, leadership. Right, this is our thing. This is the good stuff. The project itself is often incidental to the stuff that we're trying to teach about this. But there are a number of people in this group, and I certainly with our broader colleagues, that they want to assign a virtual team project, but they're really concerned about the project itself, right? A marketing project or what finance, and all of this would just be way too in depth, right? It's too much. What do you say to those folks that it's just sort of like, here's what you do so that at least the team stuff doesn't get in the way of what you're trying to teach, and maybe they learn a little something on the side to boot.
Mike, I love the way you kick that off, which is the importance of teamwork, which I wish I had a magic wand to say this is how you'd solve it. Maybe Lauren has a better answer than I do, but this idea that teamwork is important when we look at what employers want. Okay, so I'm in the Department of Psychology, and psychology is this field that spreads to so many other fields. And people say, well, I'm not really learning anything that's relevant to my career. And my comeback all the time with these students and their families is, employers are looking for 4 things. They're looking for the ability to write, the ability to present, the ability to think critically. And by the way, those are all tied together, and team behaviors. And this is what most employers are looking for general jobs. And so that teamwork part is such an important skill. But other than saying it like I did, and trying to sell it that way, it's tough, because I think the content is important and they'll learn something, but that learning to work together is also important. And that's, to me, what as instructors, and I know Lauren and I agree on this completely, we think as instructors, that's our role, is to make sure they understand how to be better team members and team leaders too. So.
And how they can articulate that to an employer. So it depends on how much pressure you feel about making sure your students are connected with jobs, and you get feedback on how well that they interview and that sort of thing. Because we're often pointing out to students, hey, this is something you could put into your portfolio. This is something you could talk about in a job interview. I know this is one of the frustrations with people with that we have with team-based learning. And in fact, we just sent in a proposal for the Team-Based Learning Collaborative Conference to talk about this very thing, which is that you can't just assume because students are doing group work that they're learning how to do group work. You need to call it to their attention. You need to be able to say, you've got to look at the people and how you put them together. You've got to look at the task. You've got to look at the context. What happens when there's conflict? How do they make decisions? All of those things. Like, these are essential elements that will make people good team members. And I think just sitting in a class that's just doing TBL and think they're going to learn it by osmosis or something is faulty reasoning. So we don't have anything to say except that we're really passionate about it, I think. And we owe it to them because they need to learn how to do this. And it's so easy now that we're remote for students to sit back and not engage with that part of it. And that's one of the frustrations that we have. I even think any like presentations and stuff like that, they just can't connect with the audience in the same way as they can. I mean, if we were standing in the classroom, nobody here would have left and nobody would be texting at the same time if we were standing in front of you. So that's kind of what we have to say. I'm cognizant of the time, so I just want to go to the other two breakout rooms and then we'll take some more questions. Can we go to room 2?
Yep, so that's me. So several of the lessons that Neil mentioned, I think also apply to our team. We talked about also using the peer evaluation in the middle, as opposed to just at the end. And the team building activities suggestions that you guys provided, I mean, we've all used many of them, but these ones, it's always nice to keep it fresh and to think of new ways to do a all about me type of an activity. So those were nice. For me personally, the understanding the virtual tools that are out there, I think being able to say, use virtual tools is one thing, but being able to actually know and be able to suggest how some of these might work and what examples students might be able to use, I think was something that I took away. And then we also talked about the IPO model, being able to actually discuss it with the class and use it as a framework to highlight important team dynamic elements and how what they're doing is sort of aligned with the IPO model, and maybe even discuss it at the end as well and saying, okay, now we've gone through this model. How did some of your team interactions, what did it look like in the context of this model? We also had a question about the leadership tool. Actually, when I just went to the blog site and clicked on it, it took me to a group project update survey. So maybe that link is not really linking to that leadership tool right now.
Got a dead link on there. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. So looking forward to taking a look at that. But another question that we had was, or just sort of discussion that we had was around the subject of forming teams. And I think you spoke to selecting team members, kind of alleviate a lot of downsides that you mentioned. And I attended a team using teams in the classroom session a couple years ago where the facilitator also mentioned the same thing. But we also talked about amongst ourselves how there could be instances where having them select their teams members themselves or the teams themselves may not be the worst thing. So we sort of have had mixed experiences with that in our group. And especially in a place like RIT where you have a number of deaf students, there have been some students who have come to us to actually request working with their deaf cohorts because they sort of live in a non-deaf world all the time, and so they appreciate being able to work with the other deaf students. And there've been some who've come and said, we don't want to work with deaf students, and certainly there are limitations around interpreting and other services that support that we're constrained by. But yeah, we just had some nice conversation around selecting teams members versus allowing them to be in their own teams, and maybe grad students or undergrads or different scenarios that might influence that.
Those are really important pieces, and I think everybody has to decide what's going to work for their population. and the culture of the school and that sort of thing. I know Tim has given out like evaluation, not evaluation, but surveys to students ahead of time and have them do some self-ratings on different aspects of their skill set, that sort of thing, and put teams together. But I actually have let the students decide, but I've said, you can't pick your own teams. What are the parameters that you want? And they kind of look around and they've actually made some really good suggestions, like, okay, you can't be with somebody that you've worked in a team before. Maybe we want to have one of each, somebody from different schools or different majors within the group, that sort of thing. So there's lots of ways to do it. And obviously, you have to pick, and you've got some unique challenges too with your student population. So, okay, let's go to room 3.
Okay, so a few of us talked about the who am I exercise, and one of the suggestions was that perhaps that is something that could be incorporated into my courses so that we can more actively have the groups get to know each other on that level, know who the other people in the class are. And then there were a number of us that talked about how to pick a leader, how to pick roles. One person said that, leader probably is not a word we should be using. Perhaps we should be using the word facilitator. So as not to create a dynamic by naming it something that incorporates certain expectations as to what that person will do. And so we talked about having assessment tools, using an assessment tool to come up with roles, doing some structured team activities. Those are all takeaways. Finally, I was saying that I was thinking, as you were talking about using Trello or a Trello-like tool to force students to assign and delegate certain tasks within a project, something that's visible to me so that I can see how they're assigning and delegating and how that is getting done. And so to create the responsibility and also create the transparency, both to all the team members and to the instructor as to who's doing what and what is getting done. And so that's basically the 50,000 foot from our team.
Yeah, and I really like that last suggestion. One of the things that we've done is created Google Drive folders for each of the teams so that everybody has to post, and we can maybe put a PERT chart in there or some kind of flow chart or timeline in there for students to look at. But that way you can go in and you have the evidence. If a student, the students group, if somebody comes to you and says, well, Keith isn't pulling his weight in the group, and I can go into the Google folder and I'm like, Keith hasn't put anything in there for 3 weeks. And so it gives you some more way to give them feedback about some of the things that are going on in the group. So that's great. All right, so no, don't tell me we're not going to do this. Sorry, here we go. Okay, Tim.
We will be sending an evaluation form, a link to a Qualtrics survey. Mike will send that later today. And of course, we'd love feedback. And if you want more information, we've referenced our website. Here's the URL down at the bottom. It's on my email that Michael forwarded to. And we put resources on that and our Facebook page and LinkedIn. So watch our pages for all this information we're putting out there. And then finally, go ahead, Lauren.
Yep. Do we have any other questions that we can answer for people that haven't, things that haven't been addressed, or even comments that you would like to make? We've got another 5 minutes.
I have one question. Come up from time to time. When you do the check-ins or any sort of feedback, do you have any tricks for actually getting students to give honest feedback? There's so many times. You even mentioned it. Oh, 5, 5, 5. Everything's fine. It's okay. And then, eventually you get them around one-on-one and they're like, yeah, so-and-so never shows up. Right. And yet they're so deathly afraid of giving that honest feedback, which they need to be able to give, and that other person really needs to hear.
Absolutely. Such an issue, Mike. And I guess we've handled it in two ways. One is back to teaching about peer evaluation. So when we spend time teaching about how to do peer evaluation, we focus heavily on developmental feedback, because during the semester, that's what we're providing. Developmental feedback to improve. And so stressing that up front in a learning environment is they start to hear it. The second thing is to force the conversation. So not only give the ratings, and again, we make our students talk about those ratings when it's developmental time, so that we don't have to do all that summative work. But when we give them the ratings, it's not just numbers, it's also what's one thing they did well, what's one thing they could improve on. And so when you're forcing that question, what's one thing they could improve on, that's just a standard question, and you're making them do self-assessment along the way. You know, I have to say most students are pretty calibrated with their self-assessment. It is the rare time when some student is just off in another world. And, you know, I'm a 5, 5, 5, 5 on everything, and everybody else is, you know, groaning and putting their head in their hands. But most of the time, students are calibrated on their self-evaluations. They say, oh, I've been late on my deadlines, and that's other people's feedback too. And so you make people talk about their self-evaluations first, and then it minimizes that other stuff. And people can just say, yeah, I agree. And so it's a way to force them to start to think about how they can improve while getting that positive regard too, that we all need, that their students need, and that we all need. So.
Right, and we actually use that in public speaking and in my interviewing class as well. First thing is, how did you do? And then I assign people to be their peer evaluators, and then, you know, they speak, and then the whole class gets to chime in, and then I say something. And usually by that time, everything has pretty much been said, but you've got to create that atmosphere where that's okay. And for some classes, I actually create kind of an understanding of confidentiality. So what's said and done in the classroom stays in the classroom. And that way, I'm not going to post on my social media that, oh, Mike was, you know, really behind on his deadlines and the whole group is mad at him, because that's going to be part of our understanding, but a way to help you. And I also have to add, I don't want to keep going back to job interviews and what employers are looking for, but I would think if a student's sitting in an interview and say, and one of the things I learned to do was to give really good constructive feedback to my peers. I mean, I think the interviewer would be blown away, because you don't hear it that often. And yet when you get into, you know, the workplace, you're going to have to be doing evaluations of other people's work. And you can't say they're all great, because that's not going to fly with your supervisor. So.
Thanks.
Can I just chime in on that real quick? So Mike, I don't know if you have a form you use, but John Ward and I created one for Biz 1 and Biz 2 because there's so much teamwork and we use them multiple times throughout the semester. I really haven't had issues with students being honest. The other thing, and I don't know if it's bad or good, but it's worked for 6 years for me, is I tell students that their grades are tied to this. So if someone's not pulling their weight, I need to know, and they're going to get a different grade than, you know, the people who are doing all the work. And so that definitely prompts usually a good conversations and some students who realize, oh, I need to step up my game if I want a good grade. So I don't know, I find that the team evaluation forms work throughout the semester work really well. And that students are pretty honest about who's doing what.
I think when you use them on an ongoing way, it also helps them to stay on task and redirect students who aren't pulling their weight, because they don't want to sit in that team meeting and look like, you know, oh, I haven't done anything. How do I handle this? So I think these regular check-ins are so important.
Yeah, because it's really easy to hide that you haven't done anything if you're only working remotely and you don't actually have a synchronous meeting. Yeah. Even whether or not it's over Zoom. So I see we've reached the end of our time, and so we don't want to keep you. We're happy if people want to contact us with other questions and concerns and things like that. And, you know, as we mentioned, we'd be happy to get some feedback from you. And also we'll have this available for people if they want to go back and look at anything that we've talked about today. And we apologize for any technical issues. We learned a lesson today about sharing.
And Lauren has lost some control, and
Right.
so
I may not be able to end the
you
meeting.
may not be
It
able to
might
end
go
the
on-
meeting. So
It might go on for a few
you're
more
to leave
hours.
yourself.
Oh,
Check in with me around dinner time and I'll let you know if I've made any progress.
well,
Thank you so much.
All
yeah,
right, thanks,
Lauren and
everybody.
Tim, thank you on behalf of all of us. We really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today. And haven't picked up the book yet, but I certainly will. And I know that you put a lot of thought into it. And I think it'll just be such a valuable resource for so many. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mike.
Thank you all. Thanks
Thanks
for all
for
your
having us.
comments and your participation. Yeah, thank you.